In 2016, 20% of nonprofit staff turned over. On average, your fundraisers stay in place for 18 months. And if you have a development operations staff of 3 people, you can expect to lose at least one in the next 1 to 3 years. I don't need to tell you the cost of this turnover in terms of disrupted relationship with donors, missing strategic information, organizational memory loss of technology and procedures. And although retaining development staff is outside of my scope of expertise, what I can do is help mitigate the costs associated with that inevitable turnover. So first, let me ask, how many lists are operating right now? And by lists, I mean, in your fundraisers world, how many of them are using their Outlooks, their Gmails, their mental lists to manage their donors and their donor relationship? I like to use the metaphor of water when I'm thinking about donor data. You probably have lots of little pools under the domain of different fundraisers, but really bringing all of that information to a single reservoir that can be kept clean and maintained and also provide a shared resource for others is really the first step in minimizing the cost of staff turnover. Not only is it good business practice, but having donor information in one consolidated location also touches on some fundraising ethics. So I recommend implementing the old adage, if it's not in the book, it didn't happen. If your donor is not in the system, he doesn't exist. So in addition to donor contact information, there's much richer information that's important to get into this reservoir as well. If a fundraising staff's departure is imminent, you may wish to invite them to a brain dump where they can just verbally download to 1 or 2 development staff support people the contacts, the strategies, the future tasks relevant to their work. However, there are more sustainable and humane approaches for developing a pipeline of information from your field fundraisers into your database system. Now, ideally, your fundraisers are working within your donor management environment. But in reality, we can acknowledge that not all of your staff or leadership have the same capacity or comfort level with technology. So whatever works for your team is actually what works best for your fundraising system. So I can recommend 3 ways of creating a pipeline of data flow into your database system.
Many software products on the market sync with Google and Outlook calendars and personal email accounts, but this integration doesn't actually solve the problem as elegantly as one would hope. Without some process in place, it just junks up your system. So whether you're working inside a sophisticated donor management system, or if we're creating a little workaround for your team, the first thing we must do is establish what information should be collected. For example, all emails or only significant emails? The number of voicemails left or only a substantive message? Any phone conversation or only a phone conversation that was a dialogue that moved a solicitation forward? So once you've created the basic guidelines of how you're going to be using your system as an archival point of contact with your donors, you can start building a pipeline of information that flows from the field into your database. Now again, ideally your fundraisers are using the donor management system as their workspace, but perhaps your software doesn't facilitate this, or perhaps your fundraisers or leadership team simply don't have the aptitude to manage their workflow within the system. Well, it's the flow that matters, not the pipe it's made of. So my go-to workarounds include the following. Designate a DevOps email where fundraisers can send contact updates, call reports, strategy notes, and future tasks to be added to the system. Development admin and executive assistants can enter the pertinent information into the system for the fundraisers. This practice creates some containment for the support staff so they aren't constantly being pinged with database updates, and it allows the data entry work to be shared among staff, which may include fundraisers. Option 2 is the fundraisers compile a summary of activities and calls at the end of the day or the week, and either set aside time to make their own data updates, or they send a summary to support staff for capture. This practice requires more time for the fundraisers than the designated email option, but it does give him or her more agency over the information that is harvested, which is simply better practice. Staffed portfolio review meetings may be the most efficient practice for piping fundraising information into the system, and it's also the most information rich because more brains are on the job, looking for patterns, making connections, identifying opportunities, and also clarifying strategies and cultivation tasks. Review meetings are the preferred practice at Jocelyn Creative because of this dynamic exchange and the density of information gleaned. But whatever practice works for your development team, formalize it, schedule it, and manage it, and you will minimize the disruption of a fundraising staff transition. Just as potentially disruptive as the loss of a fundraiser is the loss of a development operations role. And just as capturing the knowledge and information from the field is critical, so is collecting institutional knowledge and procedural know-how from support staff. So review job descriptions regularly for outdated processes and task creep. Job descriptions should reflect your DevOps actual jobs. Directors may be surprised by what DevOps staff's jobs actually include. Incidentally, this practice may actually serve to reduce staff turnover rates within the development department, so we recommend not waiting until staff gives notice to get curious about this. Documentation of key business practices. Hopefully you can check this off the list because all the critical documentation is up to date, but it's probably wise to confirm. Creating documentation is not a stop work order. It's actually quite efficient to document processes while in action. We tend to think about documentation only when the need is urgent, like a staff transition, but it's more effective when integrated into normal work procedures. One way to keep documentation on the work schedule is to request support staff read an update or watch a training video once a month, and if appropriate, update related documentation. Most software products have excellent free training resources as well as active user communities. This expectation will serve to keep both the documentation fresh as well as increase the overall utilization of the fundraising software. Cross-training other staff on critical processes ensures continuity throughout a transition and can support the creation of documentation. Ask the cross-training staff to write the step-by-step narrative of procedures during training. This isn't even cheating. It will both enhance the learning of the trainee and speed the transfer of knowledge from the existing staff to the new hire. If you don't have the staff capacity to cross-train, consider contracting database staff transition services that can support process documentation, facilitating the knowledge transfer to new staff, and perhaps bridge gift entry and other admin tasks during transition, or advise on the technical requirements for job postings and assessing qualified candidates.
So to minimize the cost associated with staff turnover, create pipelines with low friction methods for getting information, rich information, from the field through your fundraisers into the database, and then collect a reservoir of institutional knowledge that can be shared and easily distributed.